Sarah Martinez had always been small for her age. At 23, she stood barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, with delicate features that made people assume she was fragile. Her dark hair was usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she preferred wearing oversized sweaters that hid her lean frame. Most people who met her thought she was a college student studying art or literature. They were wrong about almost everything. The military shooting range in Fort Carson was buzzing with activity on that crisp Tuesday morning in March. Sarah had driven 3 hours from Denver to get there, her beat-up Civic looking out of place among the military vehicles in the parking lot. She had called ahead and received permission to use the range as a civilian contractor, though she hadn't explained exactly what kind of contractor she was. Inside the range building, the smell of gun oil and cleaning solvent filled the air. Soldiers moved about in their camouflage uniforms, checking weapons and preparing for training exercises. Sarah signed in at the front desk, showing her contractor identification to the young private who barely looked up from his paperwork. "Range 7 is available," he said, handing her safety glasses and ear protection. "You'll need to provide your own ammunition and targets." Sarah nodded and made her way through the facility. She carried a large black case that looked like it might contain camera equipment. Several soldiers glanced at her curiously as she passed. A few smiled, assuming she was there to document training exercises or conduct interviews. Range 7 was at the far end of the building, separated from the others by thick concrete walls. Sarah preferred the isolation. She set down her case and began unpacking methodically. First came the rifle case, then smaller boxes containing various tools and accessories. Everything was organized with military precision, though few would have recognized the significance of that detail. She was assembling her rifle when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. Colonel James had been watching the small woman from the observation deck above. At 55, was a career military man with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, earning numerous commendations for his marksmanship and leadership. He prided himself on being able to assess a person's capabilities within minutes of meeting them. "This isn't your range, girl," said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in the military. He stood with his arms crossed, looking down at Sarah with a mixture of amusement and condescension. "This is a precision shooting facility for trained professionals, not a place for civilians to play around." Sarah continued working on her rifle without looking up. The weapon was a custom-built bolt-action rifle chambered in .338 Magnum, capable of accurate shots at extreme distances. Most people would struggle to even lift it properly, but Sarah handled it like an extension of herself. "I have authorization to be here," she said quietly, not breaking her concentration as she mounted the scope. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, which only reinforced assumption that she was out of her depth. Walked closer, his boots clicking on the concrete floor. "Authorization or not, this isn't a game. These weapons can kill at over a mile away. Do you even know what you're holding?" For the first time, Sarah looked up at him. Her brown eyes were calm and steady, showing no trace of intimidation or annoyance. "It's a precision rifle system built on a custom action with a heavy barrel designed for long-range engagement. The scope is calibrated for distances up to 1,500 meters, though this rifle is capable of much more." Was slightly surprised by her technical knowledge, but he wasn't impressed. Knowing the specifications was different from being able to use the weapon effectively. Technical knowledge is one thing, actually hitting targets is another. Have you ever fired anything like this before? Sarah finished attaching her scope and stood up. Even at her full height, she barely came up to his chest. "A few times," she said simply. "A few times," repeated with a chuckle. He turned to address the other soldiers who had gathered to watch the exchange. "Did you hear that? She's fired a precision rifle a few times and thinks she belongs on a military range." The soldiers laughed along with their commanding officer. None of them meant any real harm, but they had all seen civilian enthusiasts come to military ranges before. Most were men who had watched too many action movies and thought shooting was easy. The few women who showed up usually needed extensive help just to handle the recoil properly. "Tell you what," said, his tone taking on the quality of a teacher addressing a struggling student. "Why don't you show us what you can do? We've got targets set up at 300 meters. If you can hit the target consistently, I'll apologize for underestimating you." Sarah considered this for a moment. She could simply ignore him and continue with her work, but she had learned long ago that sometimes it was easier to deal with skepticism directly. What if I can do better than just hit the target? His eyebrows rose. Better, what did you have in mind? If I can place 10 shots within a 2-inch group at 300 meters, will you leave me alone to complete my work? The soldiers around them exchanged glances. A 2-inch group at 300 meters was extremely difficult, even for experienced military marksmen. It required not just skill, but perfect consistency and environmental awareness. And if you can't, asked, then I'll admit you were right and leave the range. Considered this. He was confident that this young woman, despite her technical knowledge, would not be able to achieve such precision. It would be a good lesson for her about the difference between theory and practice. All right, he said, extending his hand. You've got yourself a deal. Sarah shook his hand without hesitation. Her grip was firmer than he expected, with calluses that suggested she was no stranger to physical work. Made a mental note of this, but still didn't change his assessment significantly. The group moved to the firing line. Sarah began setting up her equipment with careful deliberation. She unfolded a bipod and adjusted it to the correct height, then positioned a small notebook beside her. The notebook was filled with detailed calculations, weather data, and range cards that most of the watching soldiers didn't recognize. Atmospheric pressure is 30.1 inches, she said to herself, checking a small digital device. Temperature 72 degrees, humidity 45%, wind from the southwest at approximately 8 miles per hour. Watched with growing interest. She was taking environmental factors into account that many recreational shooters ignored completely. Still, knowing what to measure was different from knowing how to compensate for those measurements. Sarah loaded 10 rounds into her rifle, each one carefully inspected before being chambered. She settled into a prone position behind the weapon, adjusting her body until she found the perfect natural point of aim. Her breathing slowed to a steady rhythm, and her entire demeanor changed. The gentle young woman disappeared, replaced by someone with intense focus and deadly calm. Through the spotting scope, could see the target 300 meters away. It was a standard bullseye target with scoring rings, the center circle measuring exactly 2 inches in diameter. Hitting it once would be good shooting for most people. Hitting it 10 times consecutively would be exceptional for anyone. Sarah's first shot came as a surprise to everyone watching. Despite their ear protection, the rifle's report was thunderous in the enclosed space. The muzzle blast kicked up dust from the concrete floor, and several of the soldiers instinctively stepped back. But Sarah remained perfectly still, her body absorbing the recoil without moving from her position. Hit, called the soldier monitoring the target through binoculars. Center ring. Nodded but wasn't worried yet. Even a moderately skilled shooter could get lucky on their first shot. It was consistency that separated the professionals from the amateurs. Sarah's second shot followed 30 seconds later. Again, she remained motionless except for the subtle movement of her finger on the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, but she rode the recoil like she had done it thousands of times before. Hit center ring, came the call again. By the fourth shot, the chatter among the watching soldiers had died away completely. Each round was finding its mark with mechanical precision. Sarah's breathing remained steady, her movements economical and purposeful. She made tiny adjustments to her scope between shots, compensating for minute changes in wind direction that the others couldn't even detect. 5 shots all in the center ring, the spotter announced. Could hear uncertainty creeping into the young soldier's voice. Moved to his own spotting scope for a better view. Through the high-powered optics, he could see the target clearly. 5 bullet holes were clustered in the center of the target, each one barely a fraction of an inch from the others. The group was significantly smaller than 2 inches, and she was only halfway through her demonstration. Shot 6 came 40 seconds later. Sarah had noticed a slight change in the wind and took a few extra moments to compensate. The bullet struck the target exactly where she intended, adding to the growing cluster of holes in the center. 6 for 6, announced, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. The other soldiers were now watching in complete silence, beginning to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. Sarah continued her methodical process. Load, aim, breathe, squeeze, follow through. Each shot was identical to the last in terms of technique, but she made tiny adjustments for environmental factors that changed from moment to moment. Her notebook contained detailed information about this specific range, including how wind patterns changed throughout the day and how temperature variations affected bullet trajectory. Shot 7 was slightly low, but still well within the center ring. Sarah made a small adjustment to her elevation and continued. 8, 9, and 10 followed in steady succession, each one placed with surgical precision. When the smoke cleared from her final shot, an eerie silence fell over the range. The soldier with the binoculars was staring at the target in disbelief. 10 shots, he finally announced. All hits in the center ring, the group measures. He paused to double-check his measurement. 1.7 inches. Felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen exceptional shooting before, but this was beyond exceptional. This was the kind of precision that took years of dedicated training to achieve. The kind of precision that suggested this young woman was far more than she appeared to be. Sarah began packing her equipment with the same methodical care she had shown while shooting. She removed the scope, broke down the bipod, and secured everything in its designated place in her case. Throughout the process, she remained quiet and focused, showing no signs of excitement or pride over what she had just accomplished. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" asked, his voice much quieter than it had been earlier. Sarah looked up at him as she closed her rifle case. "Various places," she said simply. "Various places," repeated. He studied her face, looking for clues about her background. Her calm demeanor and precise movements suddenly took on new significance. "What kind of contractor work do you do?" "The kind that requires precision," Sarah replied, shouldering her equipment case. Felt a chill run down his spine. In his years of military service, he had worked with various types of specialists. Some were obvious in their capabilities, wearing their skills like badges of honor. Others were more subtle, blending into the background until the moment their expertise was required. "Wait," said as Sarah turned to leave. "That's shooting demonstration. How long have you been able to shoot like that?" Sarah paused at the door of the range. "Since I was 16, she said quietly. "My father believed in starting early." "Your father?" "Marine Corps scout sniper, Vietnam veteran. He taught me that precision isn't just about hitting targets." She looked back with those same calm brown eyes. "It's about understanding that every shot has consequences." With that, she walked away, leaving and his soldiers standing in stunned silence. It wasn't until she was gone that realized he had never asked her name or learned exactly what kind of contracting work she did. All he knew was that he had just witnessed shooting that belonged in the record books, performed by someone who treated it as routine. As the other soldiers began to disperse, remained at the firing line, staring at the target 300 meters away. 10 bullet holes clustered in a space smaller than a silver dollar. He had been a marksman instructor for over a decade and had never seen anything like it. He thought about Sarah's final words about understanding consequences. In his experience, people who spoke that way about shooting weren't sport shooters or hunting enthusiasts. They were individuals who had used their skills in situations where missing wasn't an option. Pulled out his phone and made a call to base security. "I need you to pull the visitor log for today," he said. "I want to know everything about the civilian contractor who was just here on range 7. 20 minutes later, he had his answer, and it explained everything. Sarah Martinez wasn't just any contractor. She was a precision specialist who worked for various government agencies on operations that officially didn't exist. Her contractor identification was legitimate, but it represented capabilities that went far beyond what had imagined. The young woman who had seemed so out of place on his range was actually one of the most skilled marksmen in the country. Her quiet demeanor and unassuming appearance weren't signs of inexperience. They were professional tools, allowing her to move through the world without attracting attention until the moment her unique skills were required. Walked back to the target and examined the bullet holes up close. Each one was perfectly round, indicating stable bullet flight and optimal ballistic performance. The group was so tight that some of the holes overlapped, creating a ragged opening barely larger than a single bullet diameter. He thought about his initial reaction to seeing Sarah on the range. His assumption that she didn't belong there had been completely wrong, but not in the way he had expected. She didn't belong there because her skills were far beyond what the range was designed to test. Coming here for her was like a professional pianist practicing on a toy keyboard. As walked back to his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just encountered something rare and dangerous. Sarah Martinez had demonstrated capabilities that few people in the world possessed, and she had done it with the casual ease of someone who had performed far more difficult tasks in far more challenging conditions. The colonel who had spent 30 years in the military, who prided himself on being able to assess people quickly and accurately, realized he had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who looked the least threatening. Sometimes real expertise came in packages that expectations. And sometimes, a young woman who looked like she should be in college was actually someone you never wanted to meet in a professional capacity, especially if you were on the wrong side of whatever operation required her particular set of skills. 3 days after the shooting demonstration at Fort Carson, Colonel found himself unable to concentrate on his regular duties. The image of Sarah Martinez and her impossibly precise shooting kept returning to his mind. He had made several discreet inquiries about her through official channels, but the responses had been frustratingly vague. Her contractor status was legitimate, but her specific assignments were classified at levels above his clearance. On Friday morning, received an unexpected phone call from General Hayes, a woman he had served under in Afghanistan and respected greatly. Her voice carried the same authority it always had, but there was something else there too, something that sounded like caution. "Jim," General Hayes said without preamble, "I understand you had an encounter with one of our precision specialists this week." Felt his stomach tighten. "Yes, ma'am. A contractor named Sarah Martinez. She demonstrated some remarkable shooting skills on our range. I need to see you in my office immediately. And Jim, this conversation is classified. You'll be signing additional non-disclosure agreements before we talk." 2 hours later, sat across from General Hayes in her office at the Pentagon. The room was sterile and official, decorated only with military commendations and photographs from various deployments. Hayes herself was a woman in her early 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat to be easily impressed by anything. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," Hayes began, sliding a thick folder across her desk. "Sarah Martinez isn't just any contractor. She's what we call a precision elimination specialist. Her official designation is classified, but her capabilities are extraordinary." Opened the folder and immediately understood why the conversation required additional security clearances. The first document was a psychological evaluation that read more like a scientific study than a standard military assessment. Sarah's IQ was listed as 187, placing her in the top fraction of 1% of the population. Her spatial reasoning and mathematical abilities were described as unprecedented by multiple evaluators. "She was recruited when she was 17, Hayes continued. "Her father, Staff Sergeant Roberto Martinez, was a Marine Corps scout sniper with 43 confirmed kills in Vietnam. He trained her from childhood, initially just as a hobby. But when military recruiters discovered her abilities during a youth shooting competition, everything changed." The next document in the folder contained training records that made his breath catch in his throat. Sarah had completed Navy SEAL training, Army Ranger School, and specialized sniper courses that himself had never heard of. Her scores in every category were perfect or near perfect. More disturbing were the psychological evaluations that described her as having exceptional emotional stability under stress and no apparent difficulty with lethal force authorization. "She's been operational for 6 years, Hayes said, watching his reaction carefully. "Her assignments are coordinated through a joint task force that reports directly to the Secretary of Defense. The operations she participates in are completely off the books." Turned to the next section of the folder and stopped cold. It was a mission summary from 18 months earlier, describing an operation in Eastern Europe. The details were heavily redacted, but what remained painted a picture of surgical precision in an urban environment. Sarah had eliminated multiple targets from distances exceeding 1,000 meters in conditions that would challenge even the most experienced military snipers. "The target count," said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How many people has she?" 127 confirmed eliminations, Hayes answered before he could finish the question. "Each one authorized at the highest levels, each one completed with perfect precision. No collateral damage, no missed shots, no compromised operations." Felt sick. The young woman who had seemed so gentle and unassuming had killed more people than most combat veterans saw in their entire careers. Yet she carried herself with the demeanor of someone who had never hurt a fly. "How is that possible?" he asked. "She looks like she's barely out of college." Hayes leaned back in her chair. "That's exactly why she's so effective. Sarah Martinez is the perfect weapon precisely because no one suspects what she's capable of. She can move through international airports without raising suspicion, attend diplomatic functions as apparent arm candy, or pose as a journalist covering conflict zones. By the time anyone realizes the threat she represents, it's already too late." The folder contained photographs from various operations. Sarah appeared in different disguises, sometimes as a businesswoman in expensive suits, other times as a backpacking tourist with hiking gear. In each image, she looked completely natural in her role, showing no signs of the deadly skills she possessed. "The psychological profile is what makes her truly unique," Hayes continued. "Most people who are capable of violence at this level show signs of sociopathy or emotional detachment. Sarah tests as completely normal in every psychological category. She forms healthy relationships, shows appropriate emotional responses, and maintains what appears to be a normal moral compass." "Then how does she do it?" asked. "Compartmentalization at a level that psychiatrists are still trying to understand. She views her work as a necessary function, like a surgeon removing a tumor. The personal and professional aspects of her life exist in completely separate mental spaces." Read through more mission reports, each one more disturbing than the last. Sarah had eliminated terrorist leaders in their own compounds, removed corrupt officials who were threatening regional stability, and neutralized threats to American interests around the world. In every case, her shots had been perfect, and she had extracted from the area without being detected. "The operation that brought her to your attention," Hayes said, "was actually a training exercise. She was testing new equipment and needed a secure facility to conduct long-range precision tests. Your range provided the controlled environment she needed." "Training for what?" Hayes paused, clearly considering how much to reveal. "There's a situation developing in Southeast Asia. Multiple high-value targets in an urban environment. The kind of operation that requires someone with Sarah's specific skill set." Closed the folder, unable to process any more information. "General, with all due respect, how is this legal? How is any of this authorized?" "Everything Sarah does operates under legal frameworks that most people never see," Hayes replied. "Presidential findings, congressional oversight through specific committees, international agreements that allow for precision intervention in cases where conventional military action would be impossible or counterproductive." "And she's okay with this, psychologically, I mean?" Hayes considered this question carefully. "According to every evaluation, yes. Sarah believes deeply in protecting innocent people from threats they can't handle themselves. She sees her work as preventing larger conflicts that would cost thousands of lives. In her mind, eliminating one dangerous individual to prevent a war is a moral imperative." Thought about Sarah's final words at the shooting range, about understanding that every shot has consequences. Now he realized she hadn't been speaking theoretically. She had been describing the reality of her professional life, where every trigger pull meant someone died and someone else lived. "There's something else you need to know," Hayes said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "Sarah specifically requested that you be briefed on her background." "What? Why?" "She was impressed by your reaction to her shooting demonstration. Most people either dismiss her capabilities or become afraid once they understand what she can do. You showed professional respect without crossing into either extreme. She thinks you might be valuable as a training partner for other specialists." Felt a chill run down his spine. Training partner for what? "Teaching conventional military personnel how to recognize and work with precision specialists. Currently, most soldiers and officers have no idea these people exist, which creates operational security problems when joint missions are necessary." The general stood up, indicating that the meeting was coming to an end. "Jim, what you've learned today is beyond top secret. Sarah Martinez and others like her represent capabilities that our nation requires but can never officially acknowledge. They operate in the shadows so the rest of us can sleep safely at night." Stood as well, still struggling to reconcile the image of the gentle young woman with the lethal professional described in the folder. "How many others are there?" "Fewer than you might think, more than you probably hope." Hayes extended her hand. Sarah has requested a follow-up meeting with you. She wants to discuss the possibility of establishing a training protocol at Fort Carson for officers who might encounter precision specialists in the field. And if I decline, then this conversation never happened. You never saw that folder. And Sarah Martinez becomes just another contractor who impressed you with her shooting skills. Shook the general's hand, knowing that he was being offered a choice that would fundamentally change his understanding of how the world actually worked. He could return to his normal duties, training conventional soldiers in conventional warfare, or he could step into a shadow world where young women who looked like college students carried out operations that prevented international disasters. I'll meet with her, he said finally. Hayes nodded approvingly. She'll contact you within the week. And Jim, everything we've discussed today is compartmentalized. Even your wife doesn't have clearance for this information. As left the Pentagon and drove back to Fort Carson, his mind struggled to process what he had learned. The world was a far more dangerous place than he had realized, but it was also protected by people who operated beyond the normal rules of warfare and international relations. He thought about the 127 marks that Sarah carried, each representing someone who would never threaten innocent people again. In conventional warfare, such a number would make someone a legendary figure, celebrated and remembered. But Sarah's victories could never be acknowledged, her sacrifices never recognized publicly. That evening, sat in his backyard with a beer, watching the sunset over the Colorado mountains. His wife asked him about his day, and he gave her the same generic answers he always provided about military bureaucracy and training schedules. But in his mind, he kept seeing Sarah's calm, brown eyes and remembering her precise, methodical movements as she placed 10 perfect shots in a target 300 meters away. Somewhere in the world, that same precision was being used to eliminate threats that conventional military forces couldn't touch. People who looked like enemies were sleeping safely, because a young woman who looked like she should be teaching kindergarten was prepared to make the shots that others couldn't or wouldn't take. Finished his beer and went inside, knowing that his life had changed irrevocably. He would never again be able to look at any situation without wondering what shadows might be hiding expertise he couldn't imagine. The world was full of Sarah Martinezes, people whose appearances concealed capabilities that most individuals couldn't comprehend. In 3 days, he would receive a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. The voice would be soft and polite, asking if he had time to discuss advanced training protocols. And Colonel James, a man who had thought he understood military capabilities completely, would begin learning about a side of warfare that officially didn't exist. The 127 marks that Sarah carried weren't just numbers. They were proof that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people no one ever saw, using skills that no one ever acknowledged, in service of a safety that everyone took for granted. 6 months after Colonel learned the truth about Sarah Martinez, he received the phone call he had been dreading. It came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jolting him from sleep with the harsh electronic tone that every military officer recognized as an emergency communication. Colonel, the voice was unfamiliar, crisp, and professional despite the early hour. This is Commander from Joint Special Operations Command. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Sat up in bed, trying to clear the fog of sleep from his mind. His wife stirred beside him, but remained asleep. In 6 months of working with the Precision Specialist program, he had learned to recognize the tone that meant something had gone seriously wrong. "What kind of situation?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Sarah Martinez has gone missing during an operation in Myanmar. We need you at Air Force Base in 3 hours for immediate transport to Yangon. Bring gear for extended field deployment." Felt his blood turn cold. In the months since their first meeting, he had worked closely with Sarah on developing training protocols for conventional forces. He had come to know her not just as an extraordinarily skilled operator, but as a person with surprising depth and humanity. The idea of her being missing in one of the most dangerous regions in the world made his stomach clench with fear. "Missing how?" he asked. "Details will be provided during transport. Just get to as quickly as possible." 3 hours later, found himself on a military transport plane with a team of specialists he had never seen before. The aircraft was configured for extended range, with fuel tanks that would allow direct flight to Southeast Asia. The other passengers were clearly elite operators, but none of them wore standard military uniforms or identifying insignia. Commander turned out to be a woman in her 40s with the kind of controlled intensity that had learned to associate with people who operated in the shadow world of precision specialists. She briefed him during the flight, using encrypted tablets that displayed classified intelligence reports. Sarah's mission was to eliminate a human trafficking kingpin named Wei, explained, showing satellite photographs of a compound in the mountains outside Yangon. Controls trafficking routes that move over 10,000 women and children per year. Intelligence indicated he was planning to expand operations significantly. Studied the photos. The compound was massive, built into the side of a mountain with natural defensive positions and limited access routes. Multiple buildings were connected by covered walkways, and guard positions were clearly visible at strategic points. "What went wrong?" he asked. Sarah made the shot successfully. Wei was eliminated at 11:47 p.m. local time yesterday, but she failed to reach the extraction point. Her last communication was at 12:23 a.m., indicating she was under pursuit by unknown hostiles. Showed a map of the extraction route. Sarah should have been able to reach the pickup point within 40 minutes of completing her mission. Instead, her tracking beacon had gone silent in a heavily forested area approximately 2 miles from the compound. Could she have been captured? Unknown. Her emergency protocols include multiple contingencies for capture scenarios. She would have activated distress signals before allowing herself to be taken alive. Understood the implication. Sarah Martinez was too valuable and knew too much to be captured. If she believed capture was imminent, she would eliminate herself rather than risk compromise of ongoing operations or other specialists. "Then why am I here?" asked. "Because you understand how she thinks better than anyone else on our roster. She specifically requested that you be involved in any rescue operations if she were ever compromised. Her psychological profile suggests she trusts your judgment in ways that she doesn't trust other operators." The flight to Myanmar took 18 hours with refueling stops. During the journey, learned more about Sarah's mission and the international implications of her work. Wei hadn't just been a criminal. He had been connected to corrupt government officials and terrorist organizations throughout Southeast Asia. His elimination was expected to disrupt trafficking networks that had been operating for decades. When they landed at Yangon International Airport, was struck by the oppressive humidity and the chaotic energy of a nation in constant political upheaval. Their team moved through customs using diplomatic credentials that asked no questions and required no explanations. The drive to their staging area took them through urban poverty that had rarely seen, even during his deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Children played in garbage-strewn streets, while adults conducted business from corrugated metal stalls. Military vehicles moved through the traffic with casual disregard for civilian safety. Their base of operations was a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city, staffed by intelligence personnel who had been in country for weeks preparing Sarah's mission. Was briefed by the team leader, a man named Stevens who spoke with a slight accent that might have been South African. "We've had surveillance drones over the area since she went missing," Stevens explained, pointing to a large screen displaying real-time satellite feeds. "No movement at the extraction point, no signals from her emergency beacons." "What about the compound where she made the shot?" asked. "Chaos. Wei's death triggered a power struggle among his lieutenants. There's been sporadic gunfire throughout the compound as different factions try to establish control." Studied the tactical displays, trying to understand what could have gone wrong. Sarah was too skilled to have made basic mistakes, and her equipment was too sophisticated to have failed without warning. Something else had happened. "I want to see her shooting position," he said. Stevens looked surprised. "That's 15 miles from here through hostile territory. We'd need a full tactical team to reach it safely." "Then organize one." 2 hours later, found himself in the back of an armored vehicle moving through mountain roads that were barely more than dirt tracks. The team consisted of 6 operators in addition to himself, all carrying weapons and equipment that officially didn't exist. Sarah's shooting position was a rocky outcropping overlooking the valley where Wei's compound was located. Could immediately see why she had chosen it. The position offered clear lines of sight, multiple escape routes, and natural concealment. It was textbook precision elimination positioning. Her equipment was still there, hidden beneath camouflage netting that would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. Examine the rifle she had used, a custom system even more advanced than the one she had demonstrated at Fort Carson. The scope contained integrated ballistic computers and environmental sensors that would automatically compensate for wind, temperature, and atmospheric pressure. She made the shot from here, one of the operators confirmed, studying the shooting data recorded in the rifle's computer system. Distance was 1,247 meters, single shot, perfect placement. Looked through the scope toward the compound below. Even with the advanced optics, it was an incredibly challenging shot. The target would have been barely visible, and the environmental conditions would have required precise calculations to ensure accuracy. "What's her evacuation route?" he asked. Stevens pointed toward a trail that led down the back side of the mountain. She should have descended approximately 800 meters to a motorized vehicle, then driven to the extraction point. Started down the trail, following the path Sarah would have taken. The terrain was treacherous, with loose rocks and steep grades that would challenge even experienced hikers. About halfway down, he found the first signs of what had gone wrong. Blood on the rocks, not much but enough to indicate that someone had been injured. 50 meters further down, he found disturbed earth that suggested a struggle. Most telling were the boot prints in the soft soil near a stream crossing. "She wasn't alone," announced to the team. "Someone was following her." Stevens examined the evidence. Could be Way's security forces. They might have had counter-surveillance in place. But was already shaking his head. "No, look at the boot prints. These are military boots, probably American or European manufacture. Way's people would be wearing locally produced footwear." The implications hit the team simultaneously. Sarah hadn't been pursued by random criminals or even Way's organized security forces. Someone with professional training and equipment had been waiting for her. "She was betrayed," said quietly. They followed the trail further, finding more evidence of pursuit and eventual confrontation. The tracks suggested that Sarah had been followed by at least 3 individuals with military training. At one point, she had apparently attempted to set up a defensive position behind fallen trees, but the blood evidence indicated she had been wounded during the engagement. The trail ended at a clearing where helicopter landing marks were clearly visible in the dirt. Sarah Martinez, the woman who had eliminated 127 targets without ever being detected, had been captured by people who knew exactly where she would be and when. "This was planned," told Stevens as they returned to their vehicle. "Someone with access to classified mission details set her up." Stevens was already on his radio, communicating with handlers back in Washington. Could hear pieces of the conversation, mentions of compromised operational security and immediate investigation protocols. Back at the warehouse, sat in a secure communication room speaking directly with General Hayes via encrypted satellite link. The general's face on the screen showed the strain of someone dealing with a worst-case scenario. "The intelligence leak is being investigated at the highest levels," Hayes told him. "But right now, our priority is recovering Sarah before her capture can be exploited." "Do we have any idea where she is?" "Negative. The helicopter could have taken her anywhere within a 500-mile radius. We're analyzing satellite data to track its movement, but that will take time we may not have." Understood the urgency. Sarah Martinez knew details about operations, personnel, and capabilities that could compromise national security if extracted through torture or drug-induced interrogation. Her psychological profile suggested she could resist conventional interrogation techniques, but everyone had breaking points. "There's something else," Hayes continued. "We've intercepted communications suggesting that Sarah's capture wasn't random. Someone is planning to auction her skills to the highest bidder." Felt sick. The idea of Sarah being forced to use her extraordinary abilities against American interests was almost unbearable. But worse was the thought of what would happen to her once her usefulness to her captors was exhausted. "What are my orders?" he asked. "Find her, whatever resources you need, whatever risks are necessary. Sarah Martinez cannot be allowed to remain in hostile hands." Over the following week, worked with intelligence teams to analyze every piece of available information. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and human intelligence assets all contributed to a gradually clearing picture of what had happened. Sarah had been captured by a private military contractor working for a Chinese intelligence service. The operation had been planned for months, using inside information about American precision specialists to identify and target specific individuals. Sarah was apparently the primary objective, but she wouldn't be the last. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of Wei's former associates, seeking to establish his position in the power struggle following the Kingpin's death, contacted American intelligence with information about Sarah's location. In exchange for protection and relocation to the United States, he provided detailed intelligence about a facility where high-value prisoners were being held. The facility was located on an island in the sea, accessible only by boat or helicopter. It was heavily defended and staffed by international mercenaries with sophisticated equipment and training. Most disturbing, intelligence suggested that Sarah was being held there along with other captured intelligence assets from various nations. Volunteered to lead the rescue operation, despite his lack of experience in direct action missions. His understanding of Sarah's psychology and capabilities made him uniquely qualified to locate and extract her safely. The assault team would consist of 20 operators from various special operations units, supported by naval assets and air cover. The mission launched at dawn on a Sunday morning, with its team approaching the island from multiple directions. As their boats moved through the early morning mist, thought about the young woman who had impressed him with perfect shooting 6 months earlier. She had saved thousands of lives through her precise elimination of dangerous individuals, and now it was time for someone to save her. The assault began with coordinated strikes on the facility's defensive positions. His team landed on the eastern shore of the island and fought their way through prepared positions toward the main detention facility. The resistance was fierce but not unexpected. These were professional soldiers defending a valuable asset. Found Sarah in an underground cell designed for high-value prisoners. She had been wounded during her capture and showed signs of interrogation, but her eyes still held the same calm intelligence he remembered. When she saw him approaching her cell, she smiled for the first time since he had known her. "I knew you'd come," she said simply. "Can you move?" asked as he worked to free her restraints. "I can do whatever is necessary," Sarah replied, proving that her spirit remained unbroken despite her ordeal. The extraction was successful, but the cost was high. 3 operators were killed during the assault, and several others were wounded. But Sarah Martinez was free, and the intelligence she provided about her captors led to the identification and elimination of the security breach that had compromised her mission. 6 weeks later, Sarah returned to duty with new protocols designed to prevent similar betrayals. Her reputation was enhanced rather than diminished by her capture, surviving professional interrogation and maintaining operational security under torture demonstrated psychological strength that impressed even her most experienced colleagues. Colonel continued working with the Precision Specialist Program, training conventional forces to recognize and support these unique operators. He never forgot the lesson Sarah had taught him about making assumptions based on appearances, and he never stopped being amazed by the courage of people who carried burdens that most individuals couldn't imagine. Sarah Martinez returned to active operations with her record standing at 127 confirmed eliminations. Her experience as a prisoner had given her new insights into the minds of the enemies she faced, making her even more effective in her mission to protect innocent people from those who would exploit or harm them. The young woman who looked like she should be teaching kindergarten continued to eliminate threats that conventional military forces couldn't touch, carrying her marks not as trophies, but as proof that someone was willing to make the hard choices necessary to keep the world safe. And Colonel slept better at night knowing that people like Sarah Martinez were standing watch in the shadows, ready to take the shots that others couldn't take.